So, in this session, Norm is going to talk about his famous tagline that's even written on the back of our book. There's no such thing as too many anchors. I'm not sure how many times I've heard him say that now. And he's going to be covering the topics of texture and direction of anchors, holding capacity of the soil, loads are up, down, and sideways, easy in and out. Take it away, Norm.
Thank you. Welcome back to all. And certainly one of the things, like we have a lot of East Coast customers, and uh, almost invariably within the first minute or two of any conversation, people will express, "It's really windy here." And we have some windy locations in Ontario as well, but I think that as an average, certainly the East Coast ranks right up there. And so anchoring is something that I discuss with many people regularly, because it really is the difference between uh, getting some return and satisfaction out of your purchase, rather than just grief and stress. And so anchoring is something that comes up regularly, and also regularly I make as a separate element in any presentations, because it is so important. The and as I've alluded to in other parts of this presentation, preparation, until we talk about preparation, knowing what you're dealing with uh, is important. I don't know how many times I have said, or I've heard people say, "Well, there's no rocks here." And have you checked it? No. Well, maybe you should go and check it, because um, it is a lot easier to redirect things and come up with a better plan B if you know what you're dealing with, than you're halfway through and you come up with a very expensive correction, which might involve backhoes or extra cement or anything like that. So know what you're dealing with. The if you're in a point of excavating your soil to level it, you are dealing with what we describe as recently disturbed soil. Recently disturbed soil does not have the holding capacity that soil that has never had anything done with it. And so, if that's what you're dealing with, um, there are things that you need to do. And okay, and the point of this presentation is not so much to come up with all the answers, because there are simply too many variables. What I would like to do here primarily is make you aware of things that could potentially be a problem so that they are addressed, but also just get you um, to think outside the box, to know that there are solutions if you are dealing with something, like if there are a lot of rocks on your particular property. There are ways of dealing with it that do not have to cost you an arm and a leg. These are not things that are insurmountable. Uh, they're just things that require a little bit of creativity. The So it's certainly something that has to be addressed as to what is the holding power of your soil, because with every structure there are three different loads that are being expressed, and the anchor posts have to deal with all three of those. The one that is most commonly comes up is, what's the snow load on your building? Well, that in a way is a structure issue, like how strong is the building, but the anchor posts also have to deal with that. Like if there is a lot of weight on that building all the time, you're going to get settling. And so the anchor posts have to help with that. The other, the next thing that we always have to deal with is the sideways motion. So the anchor posts are holding the building where they are. And to think that the structure could potentially have enough weight on its own that you don't need to consider that is foolish thinking. I've seen multiple situations year after year where people had huge amounts of weight that they thought was huge amounts of weight, and you do not find out that this is lacking until after you have a problem when the things have moved. I had a, we, in one of the previous segments today, we talked about the extra lift, the extra load that is created when something gets taller. I had a situation once years ago where somebody mounted their buildings on really big I-beams that he had inherited. And what happened was the building was sitting on this and the wind was coming across, and the vacuum that was created on the backside actually sucked out the backside until the building was low enough that now the uplift was low enough that it stopped moving. So there was a tremendous amount of lateral shift. So that's something that definitely needs to be considered every time you're coming up with anchors. And then there is, so that's a combination of lateral shift and uplift. I do the analogy of an airplane wing many times. When you look at the shape of an airplane wing, there's that air going over top that creates lift. Well, you've got the air going over top of a greenhouse, but you want the opposite result. You want it to stay where it is. So, just to illustrate how much uplift there is, and the anchor posts have to hold that down. Now, Andy, if you could put up the picture of the T-posts coming at different angles. So one of the things that you need to keep in mind when choosing anchor posts is not just what holding power does a particular anchor post have. There are ways, and one of the things that we anchor a lot of our buildings with is T-posts because they are so versatile. It's really hard steel, so you can hammer them quite hard without doing damage. But the anchor post, the T-post by itself does not have a lot of holding power, except when you use it with a buddy. Now the buddy has to be on the opposite angle. What happens is the anchor post wants to lift, like that end anchor post. If that was used by itself and the wind was coming from the end, it would get pulled up with not all that much resistance. But you have the one beside it that is going in the opposite direction. Now, because there is so little flex in those posts, they each have their own way of holding a post, holding a building down. They're working against each other. So if, for example, you said the anchor post on the left has 300 pounds of holding power, the one on the right has 300 pounds of holding power. It's not a case of you add the two together and come up with 600. Because they're going in opposite directions, they're actually magnifying the holding power. So that's why when you are using these kind of posts primarily like in movable structures, we always recommend T-post because it is so easy to alternate the angle. Or any of even our permanent buildings, the um, the holding power is magnified when you go back and forth like that. And the other thing that is nice with the T-posts like this is that you do not have to do consistent spacing. What we typically suggest is if your structure is long enough that you need 30 posts per side, you don't put them the same distance all the way down. You put them closer together at the front where there is more wind load, especially when you've got an end closed. You're going to get extra force, so you want to have extra holding power. Whereas towards the middle, there's less holding power, so the fact that they're a little farther apart is good. Now, when and okay, if I could ask Andy to switch to the other slide of the regular, what I call a regular anchor post. Now, but what I mean by regular is, well, these are ones that we sell. We can sell the T-post to you as well, but you can buy them at the lumber yard for the same price as us. The anchor posts that we sell, they have to go in an exact spacing all the way down in a straight line, and they're straight into the ground. Now, something with a rough texture is going to give you extra holding power, so that is a good thing. But because they have to be in the ground so precise, it makes them a lot more challenging for people that are dealing with a lot of rocks. And whereas like the base beam with the T-post give you a lot of flexibility in that you can move around the rocks. The consistency of the spacing is not a requirement. So if you're working around big rocks, you put them wherever they can. The other thing with the T-posts is, generally speaking, you buy them in a certain length, you cut them in half. Now, if you're dealing with a fairly shallow bedrock or a lot of rocks close to the surface, what you can do is you can cut those into shorter lengths. So if you're using more short ones rather than fewer long ones, the holding power will be the same, but you're not going as deep. The other thing that has to be kept in mind is that you can go and put all the anchor posts in the ground you want, but if they're not fastened properly to the base beam or the curb, it's not going to have the desired effect. So you can always add more of those in super windy locations just to give you that extra connection point, extra point of contact that will make the thing secure. The screw-in anchors, the earth anchors, are an extremely effective anchor, and I don't have a picture of one of those, but they're available at most lumber yards. But the problem is, again, like, how do you get them into the ground when your soil is extremely hard or you're dealing with a lot of rocks? But they are especially versatile in getting some extra holding power at the ends. They're the kind of anchors that are used for the big display tents, where they actually have a machine to turn them in. Now, these anchor posts, if you are in a situation where you've got recently disturbed soil, you've got big rocks that have had to be excavated, and you're using this kind of an anchor post, you can then enhance the holding power by augering a hole or using a sonotube and putting cement in it as extra holding power. The cement will actually have a footing capacity, So like the downward pressure it holds on that, but it also has the uplift resistance that you will need for holding things. So those are the kind of things that have to be kept in mind when you're considering anchor posts, and are especially important to keep in mind if you're dealing with a movable structure where the convenience is something that is utmost in people's mind. Easy in, easy out. You have to make sure that your situation lends itself to that so that you can deal with it. And certainly, like if in your particular location, I know that everybody's property is different. Everybody has their own challenges. And I urge you to certainly ask questions here and we will discuss it. But if you perceive your situation as challenging, make sure you ask.
Maria had made a comment as well that she had a cold frame 20 odd years ago and put poles 3 feet into the ground and above the same and the same above ground and then the cold frame, and it was double poly and a blower, and the winds and snow were bad out there, but the cold frame last time I went by the property is still standing and looks in good shape.
See, so one thing to keep in mind when you have an anchor post that is into the ground and sticking out of the ground, like if you take a fence post, which goes into the ground a little ways and it sticks out, and if you grab that fence post, even if it's really secured, you can still move that fence post a little bit. Now magnify that times 100, because Mother Nature has got a whole lot more strength than what you're able to do on wiggling that post. So that leverage that comes by sticking out of the ground is another thing that has to be considered when picking anchor posts. Another thing that I didn't mention is when you have a building that is 20 feet wide, that means that you've got 10 feet of rain that goes this way and 10 feet of rain that goes this way, which means that 1 foot on each side is going to get 10 times as much rain as the rest of your property. Wet soil does not have the same holding power as well-drained soil. So another thing to keep in mind, the bigger the building, the more that multiplier happens on the edge. So if you think you're at all in borderline holding conditions, when you take that into account, just means that you need to address those issues. Wintertime for that is not a problem, because once it's frozen, now you've got like even more holding power. But what I had happen one time was that they put in a trench, they put 2 feet of styrofoam along each side to insulate from the cold getting in. But now that was very disturbed soil that they packed it back in and put the anchor posts in, which had almost no holding power at all. So now the structure started shedding the rain into that soft soil already, and the wind came at it from the side and just turned the whole thing over. And that's why, like, if you're wanting to use styrofoam along the side, I'll get into another discussion with you privately about how to minimize the risks, because that's a bad combination.
Well, and the other options too that some people do is they use the large 1-ton blocks or shipping containers as well. If they can't go into the ground or whatever, then they can build it up that way. But then you have more risk with wind, right?
Well, using those big blocks is definitely becoming a more popular way of dealing with it uh, for a number of reasons. One, in a lot of municipalities, if you have anything into the ground, it's considered permanent. So if you have it's sitting on blocks, well, there's nothing on the ground, so it's considered temporary. The other thing is that the big thing, it gets you some extra height, which in a lot of cases is a valuable thing. And you've got the weight there to hold the building in place, more than enough weight. So it helps on a number of different scores. But the blocks are not cheap and they're not easy to move. So there's a little bit of a logistics issue as well.
I know Martha had a bit of a concern with the rocks and everything in her area. So I think you covered things pretty good, but if Martha would like to have any more information, let us know if we didn't cover it completely. But yeah, this is an example of the shipping containers too, which also aren't the cheapest way, but it does the same job that the cement blocks do, right? So
Yeah.
just a few different options.
Now, was it Martha or Maria that asked about had the problem? Maria?
Martha said about the rocks. Maria said about the cold frame that she had.
Okay. See, because we have some customers where, like for example, in the Kingston area, where the bedrock is actually there might in some places there's like a foot of soil, and then you've got like bedrock, the Canadian Shield. And so that is a separate issue again, and we have ways of anchoring the structure to that. But again, that's a little bit more technical than I want to get in here, but just something to keep in mind.
To know that the options are there, right?
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate this one. Oh, AC is asking, what length do you recommend for the T-posts for anchoring?
And I'll make two points about the T-post, because there are actually two different grades of T-posts, and you want to get the hard steel ones rather than the ones that are a little bit softer. And generally what I suggest is either the 7 or 8 foot ones, and then cutting them in half, because you are putting them on a little bit of an angle, so they're not going quite as deep as if you drove them straight in. So going with a 6 foot T-post, and then you cut it in half and you cut it on an angle, or like you drive it on an angle, is a little bit shallower. Now, but like as I alluded to, there are situations where the rocks are there consistently, that you're going to have to put some shorter posts in. So you're putting more short posts in. But it would be my suggestion for your specific situation, saying, okay, this is the structure that I'm going to use. How many anchors do I use in really rocky condition? And I'll give you an adjusted number compared to like if they can just go in normal. But as I mentioned, it's then critical, especially if you're using more short anchors, that you actually pay more attention to fastening them to your base beam, even than when you have the longer ones.
Aaron also asked, can you use sonotubes for anchors just at the corners of the structures with T-posts in between for the Hanley structures?
The Hanley structures is a completely different beast, and so like unless you're making modifications to the Hanley so that you can put ends in it, if you don't have ends in your tunnel, like so you haven't made those changes, then doing concrete to the end is not going to help. Now, as far like you noticed on the Hanley pictures that the plastic has a tail, to set those into concrete is going to give you extra holding power, but that also you're losing versatility of where you can move it. You can't just move it a little bit here or a little bit there. Like once you've got that concrete there, there's sort of a commitment to that spot. And usually the tunnels is people want to get away from that rigidity.
AC had a follow-up question as well that said, how important is it for the end wall to be facing directly into the prevailing winds in a moderately windy area?
We do suggest wherever possible that the end faces the wind, because that then, like all of the bracing that is part of the structure is geared to bracing the end. Whereas if you have the structure turned the other way, when the wind is always hitting the side, you've got an uneven wind load. Actually, the vacuum on the backside is close to double what the wind pressure is on the lead side. So you've always got that building being pulled sideways. Now, that the wind never comes from the same direction all the time, but like there is, every spot has a prevailing direction. So wherever possible, you face the prevailing wind. And if you're in a situation that you have no choice because of different things on the property that you have to put it the other way, that is something we discussed too, to just create some extra lateral strength in the structure. Good questions.
Maria had one as well about using shipping containers. She says, as far as using shipping containers, how do you attach it to the container, and how high would the center be if since the shipping container is already so tall?
So the same beam that you would use to anchor the structure to the ground, that beam would be mounted on top of the container and then just get bolted right into the roof. Now, usually there's a bead of silicone or something that goes in between so that it doesn't leak. The height of these applications is always an issue that is being addressed. Now, in this particular photograph, it was a 30-foot wide building that we actually modified to 34 feet wide, because what was happening was it just spread it out like that. So you're actually decreasing the wind load a little bit by bringing the top down. And because now it's also a little bit flatter, so we just brought the rib spacing a little bit closer together in case there was any snow issues on there. And also the closer spacing does beef up the wind loading strength. Different, of course, are going to give you different heights, the same as if you're building on the ground.
I'm looking, we don't have a really good picture of how it's attached to the. It would be attached the same as the salt one though, right?
Well, there's,
it would have the base brackets attached to the shipping container like that, right?
yeah, so like in that particular, that beam is, in this case, it's leg bolted into the concrete. And so that anchor goes at least 6 inches into the concrete. Whereas if you were bolting this to a container, now the bolt will only be about 1 inch longer than the depth of the beam, because you're just drilling through the lid of the container, putting a good sized washer underneath there, and then putting a nut on there, so it's actually bolted to it. And but you have to be careful there where you're drilling and bolting, because the top of these containers is all corrugated, like it has the little waves, and you only want to be bolting into the bumps, not into the valleys.
Here, I think I found one. This one just shows the wood, how it's attached, and then the corrugated.
So yeah, like just the same way that the wall is corrugated like this, the roof, in most cases, the roof is corrugated the same way, just to give it, it's that corrugation that gives it the strength.
Everybody that had questions, did they get addressed fully? Was everybody good with the answers that Norm gave? Looks like it.
I'm glad to see that the issue that is the most important to me also generated the most questions. That's kind of gratifying. That that's my mission, to get people to hang on to their structures.
I actually said to our office assistant over text when we started about how neat it is to see how passionate you are about anchors. So that was really that was a great session. Thank you, everybody. And we're gonna have our final session, which is about season extension and ventilation. It's gonna start at 11 or at 1:15. Are we gonna still start at the same time, Norm?
Yep.
Okay.
Or maybe a few
And-
minutes late, but
Okay. And the topics are summer and winter issues. Air circulation is not ventilation, considering humidity and temperature, and the consequences of both. And so we will see you back here in less than 10 minutes.